Okay, we'll rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
of the United States of
the
America,
republic
and
which
to
it
the
stands,
republic for which it stands,
under God,
one nation.
under God, justice for all. Finished early. All right, Ashley, do you want to take the roll call?
Mike Hobson,
Here.
Marilyn Ertley,
Here.
Deborah Nelson,
Here.
Dawn Fanny,
Here.
Jan Schwetty,
Here.
Jessica Stickles,
Here.
Michelle Blythe,
Here.
Looks like we have a little bit of a sound delay, so we'll try to be cognizant of that.
Yeah.
Madam Mayor, I would like to approve the agenda as presented. Make a motion to approve as agenda as presented.
Second.
Question?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Slowing that down a little bit for the sound delay. Okay, so we'll jump right into our long list of workshop items this evening. First thing we have is the Coronavirus Relief Fund Grant for local government. Turn it over to Paul.
Well, thank you. Good evening, everybody. Yes, this is a grant that we receive or will receive. We've been approved for COVID relief funds. This is through the Social Security Act. These funds were designated to cities based on population. And so our allocation based on that is $592,200. This is a reimbursement grant. So we'll have to expend the funds and then get reimbursed as we use them. The very last page of the section is a proposed budget. These funds cannot be used to subsidize lost revenues. So we can't use these to make up revenues the city has lost. However, we can use them to offset expenses directly related to the COVID pandemic and to use them for community and business stabilization. So having said that, we've come up with a budget of using these funds for expenses. We have put together a rental relief program that's economic stabilization for businesses. That's actually item number 2 on your agenda tonight, so you'll learn more about that here in just a few minutes. That's $200,000 to fund that program. The Arlington Family Resource Center received a small grant earlier to help with rental relief mortgages and utility payments for people. We're proposing another $100,000 for that so that they can help with our community members that are having difficulty making their rent or paying their utilities. We've set aside the remainder of the $292,000 to offset the city's costs. Some of those costs that we've already spent is for the masks that are getting mailed out this week. We put a program in to supply curbside pickup signs so that we can close parking along like Olympic Avenue so that it makes it convenient for businesses, restaurants to do takeout and eventually here retail to be able to do curbside pickup. We're also proposing some help from WSU in the downtown area to help with recovery. The remainder of the funds will be set in more of a reserve fund. These funds have to be expended by October of this year. Some of that will be for related expenses at the city. And then the balance we're proposing will come back to council for possibly another round of funding for some of these, the rental relief or the Arlington Family Resource Center, wherever the funds would be needed. So based on that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
I have one, Paul. On the WSU downtown recovery, could you explain a little bit of that?
Yeah, we reached out to WSU to help with some of what we were hearing from the businesses downtown about what the recovery is going to be like, and marketing the downtown area in what you could dub as the new economy. We don't suspect by looking at, it's early on, but looking at what has happened in other areas that have been able to open in advance of us, you don't see the customers flood in necessarily into the businesses. There's going to need to be some new marketing, some new tactics to be able to help the businesses rebrand themselves in what could be a different economy for a while.
Is that WSU the Everett campus or Pullman?
It's the Metro Extension Center, which is based out of the Everett campus, but it's the branch that uses the professors and the different departments with things that relate to economic development in areas. So they did a lot of work with America's Best Communities.
Yeah, this is virtually the same group that was helping us during that time.
Okay, thank you.
Marilyn and then Deborah.
I just wondered if we have any clue whatsoever what the turnaround time is on reimbursement for this.
We do this. These grants are through the Department of Commerce, is who's administrating them. In the past, we've done a lot of grants, several grants that have come through them. Their turnaround time is fast, and we don't have to wait to expend all the funds. When we finish a project or we get to a spot where it makes sense to do a progress billing on it, that's normally, we haven't got the contract for this yet, but that's normally been my experience with Department of Commerce, and their turnaround time is fairly fast.
Well, that's good. I just wouldn't want to see us get far behind.
Yeah, when I got the email from the Department of Commerce, they do realize that they need to get these funds out into the community. And so, and they realize that cities are down in revenue.
The whole program is from March 1st till October. So it's a pretty short window of expense time.
Excellent. Thank you.
Deborah?
Back to the WSU recovery, downtown recovery. So is this, what kind of, would this be a high quality type product, or is this students type of product? Because, I feel like this is such an essential item. So shouldn't we look at maybe hiring professionals to help our businesses with new type of marketing?
That's a great question. This wouldn't be a student-led project. This is the people from the Metro Extension, which are professors and faculty with the Washington State University, just like we saw with ABC. And one of the questions that we're kind of asking them, and some other small cities are asking these questions, since we're virtually seeing all of our summer events and gatherings go away. And we know that downtown, we drove a lot of traffic into our businesses from big, huge gatherings. And with what does it look like to those small businesses in recovery? How do they pivot from that if they don't have those days that drive hundreds of people into their storefronts? Are there other ways that they can pivot their marketing and be prepared to go through the fall, through the end of the year, the third and fourth quarters, having some reasonable expectation of how they could drive revenue into their businesses?
So this last week, one of the webinars I sat through was from Smart Cities. And it was actually, I believe it was through Western Washington University, but really the company was Surefront, it was called. And they were up in Vancouver, and it was exactly this type of a topic. And they were kind of your young techie entrepreneurs helping businesses, retail businesses specifically, kind of become COVID modern. So maybe I'll send that to you and Paul, the link to that. And
great.
Yeah.
That'd be great. I mean, when we even think about in phase 2, when our restaurants can reopen. They're
Mhm.
reopening to 50% capacity. And so we need to know, what can we do as a city? Where can our policies, can we expand outdoor eating areas? Or what can we do to help them, make the revenue they would have made if all of their seats were available to customers?
Yeah, I just want to make sure we're getting the most for the money. And so to be honest, sometimes when we've hired through universities, I feel like we don't really get a lot in return. So I'm just kind of throwing that hesitation out there. I think the purpose and the goal is spot on. I'm just curious of the supplier of that information. So that's my only hesitation. But I will send you both. Maybe I'll send it out to all of council, the link to what I watched.
That would be great. One of the reasons we asked WSU to give us a proposal is they had done so much research on us after the OSO slide and through ABC that they have a good fundamental knowledge of our businesses, and they work directly with them. So we could cut off that whole research period of time. A consultant would want to come in and get to know what your downtown was like before COVID.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Michelle?
So we already paid them the $28,000?
No.
No, we haven't
Oh.
even gotten the full proposal.
okay.
So we're just trying to, Paul wanted to put a budget together to you all so you could approve a budget and when you approve the grant.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Jessica?
I had a question on the
Just-
resource center. Yeah?
Mhm.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I had a question on the resource center. I was wondering, actually I had a couple of questions. So one was, how much did they receive already? The second question is, why did we pick 100,000? What was the decider that made it that amount? And then do we have any type of accountability with them to have them report back and let us know what the funds were spent on, since we don't have any upfront contracts?
So can I go ahead?
Yeah, sure.
So if we proceed with this, that would be through an MOU with them. They received $25,000 from the Snohomish County Foundation's COVID-19 fund. I think about 3.5, almost 4 weeks ago. And they've expended it all on rent, utilities, mortgage payments for people. And they were looking for funds that can focus on people that are specifically harmed by COVID-19, lost their jobs, lost the income, as opposed to the set of people that they, people in poverty that they're always helping. But, what we've seen, the increase in people who can't pay their utility bills or defraying payments for a couple of months. And we picked that amount because it was something they suggested that they could really spread and help out. It would just be for people in the Arlington area. They would ask other cities for funds from their COVID funds for people they might serve in their areas. And then they would present us with a report, probably however often we wanted it, how many people they helped and what they used the funds for. But the MOU we thought would be specific based on the guidance of how these funds can be used. We have to be specific with them up front about how they could be used. And we're thinking rent relief and utility payment relief are the two areas that completely comply with the Department of Treasury's guidance on this funding.
Okay, thank you for answering all those. My only request would be sometime before the end of the year, I'm sure, because if the funds have to be spent before October, that gives a couple months to do accounting.
Right. We have to expend the funds as the city by October 31st.
Yeah.
So if we had a bunch of funds on October 31st and we wanted to give them more money because they needed to work with, and we made that MOU with them, then that's us expending the funds. Does that make sense? Michelle?
So, hey, Barb, I know this might be a silly question. Do you expect that they would use the entire 100,000 for utilities, for people needing help with utilities and their rent?
I do.
They
They don't-
used the first 25,000 in less than 4 weeks.
Wow. Okay.
And what they said is each time somebody comes in, they have to go through that whole qualifying appointment with them, you know, to look at the holistic. They can't just come in and say, I need rent from you. They have to look at the whole situation. So they have to do sort of a preliminary scope out of what payments they're behind in, what they owe, you know, and ensure that if they give this relief, people can use their other funds for medication or other things wherever they're in the bind with.
Yeah, I mean, they do so much to help the community, so I'm sure it'll get all used for those specific items, but just curious.
I don't know if you all are following the news about the unemployment rates. Snohomish County currently has the highest unemployment rate in all of the county. And, you know, if you all read the papers on the weekend, you saw Boeing's going to be laying off people, and UW Medicine's laying off a lot of people. So as people come back from this, some of them have a big gap of revenue that they missed, you know, and it's going to be a while, just like the city, until you make that back up. So there are going to be repercussions to people individually as well as to our businesses. Any other questions?
Do we know if the VOA or Snohomish County Volunteers of America got funds as well?
They did not. These are funds that are going to municipalities based out of the state's allocation.
Oh, I'm sorry, I just meant COVID dollars, CARES funds, that kind of stuff, not necessarily this specific one.
We don't know of any funds that have been released to nonprofits or aid organizations. Even the food bank is getting lots of food, but they haven't gotten any CARES funding. That we're aware of.
Yeah.
Any
Good.
other questions on that? Good. Everybody good with Paul's budget?
Yep.
So we'll move into the second item, which is the draft of our business rent relief grant program.
Correct. This is the program that I referred to in the budget of the last item. This is the rental relief fund that focuses on businesses that have been affected by the COVID epidemic. This would allocate $200,000 of the relief funds that we just talked about to a grant process that would award grant funds to individual businesses to cover rent that they are unable to make or have been or because they've suffered from lack of business or being shut down. The grant would have a maximum award of $3,500. We did some research on that, and that seemed to be a number that would cover on the high end 1 month's rent, on the median 2 months rent, and make the funds go as far as we could stretch them. And it's what we're trying to do is create if you had a chance to look at this, a very simple grant application that's not too cumbersome to put together, that we can qualify the businesses and get the money out to them sooner than later, so that we're actually helping them out.
So Paul, who is handling that on the city's end that's going to be looking at the applications and making those decisions?
Sarah Lopez and Kristen Garcia have been the primary staff working on this project.
Okay, real good. Thank you.
One of the questions I have is, I see it's a scoring criteria. So say, for example, these businesses like some of the restaurants and stuff that have been able to continue to operate as a takeout, they're scoring versus the stores and stuff that have not been able to open whatsoever. Is there going to be criteria there to recognize that?
Yeah, it's mainly weighted to, the small businesses. So it's the real mom and pops, stores and restaurants that just, are struggling during this. So the weighting was an ability to just be able to vest the businesses. So like I said, we can do the greatest good with the really limited amount of money that we have there.
Okay.
So the scoring is based on the questions that you saw in the application, which I think was on the second page there. And so I think number 2 sort of qualified, that second question sort of qualified their impacts. If they had reduced hours, reduced staff, they had to close. They were essential and had no impacts.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I think it looks great.
Yep, I thought so too.
So we would open up this process a week from today. If you approved it at next Monday's council meeting, then the applications would open the next day and be open for a week. And if it's anything like what the county saw in their process that they opened last week, they received a request for within 48 hours for double the amount of money they had put away to give, which is like $7.5 million. And they received requests for 16.7 million.
I think it's a wonderful way to help the city and just be very, have it, it looks like we're very proactive and understanding that they need help. And this is a great way to show that. And I feel like it's partnering with them, helping them out. I think it's a wonderful thing to do.
Jessica?
Yeah, I agree with Michelle, and I'm really grateful the fact that they gave us the flexibility to be able to give this to businesses to use on rent. And I wish there was so much more we could do, but yeah, I really appreciate Sarah and Wendy and everyone who's put time into this, because wording matters on these types of things. I think a lot of the businesses are filling these out left and right. So making it as easy as possible is appreciated.
Yeah, when we first found out we were going to get the funds, the guidance did not allow us to do this with it. So the Federal Department of Treasury rewrote the guidelines, and we just got those about a week ago. It was a whole new 8-page document. Here's new guidelines. Marilyn?
I just wanted to say that I agree that this is really a wonderful thing for people who can't pay their rent. And it's also good for the landlord who wouldn't be receiving the rent. So, it helps all around. So I think it's great.
We'll have to let businesses know that this does not hinder any ability, and what won't count against them if they apply for a city grant and a county grant. It doesn't disqualify them. So I thought that was good. Okay, should we move on to the next item? Now we'll spend some money. The apparent a low bid for the 2020 airport project. Marty?
Yeah, Madam Mayor and council members, this item is for the 2020 airport improvement project bid award and grant acceptance. We went out to bid again on the project. The improvement projects were approved as part of the airport's biennial budget and involved the following. It was a design, construction, and construction management services for the runway 1634 lighting, taxiway Bravo lighting project, and taxiway Bravo overlay projects. The city advertised the project at Builders Exchange, and we opened bids on May 19th. Lakeside Industries came in as the lowest bidder for construction at $2,708,598.44. Staff contacted the references, and the contractor references came back very positive. We're requesting that the council authorize the mayor to sign the contract with Lakeside Industries in an amount not to exceed $2,708,598.44. And we also would like to get the mayor to sign and city attorney to sign for the WashDOT Airport. We're also applying for the remainder portion of that funding to be covered partially by WashDOT. Airport aid grant offer and FAA grant offer subject to grant award for the 2020 airport improvements project. If awarded, we expect to receive both grant awards in the coming weeks. So I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Do they have any questions?
Just as a side note, we came in well with under the engineer's estimate on it, so we got good numbers.
Good news, yes.
Very good.
We hope you're successful with the additional grant filings as well.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll move to the next item, which is the apparent low bid for the 204th 77th roundabout. Jim Kelly, are you with us? Is Jim Kelly on?
What happened to?
Do you want to take his?
Yeah, I'll take this. You have to bear with me a little bit. We bid the 204th and 77th Street roundabout. This is a project long time in the coming. Looks like
You want me to read it? Reese Construction.
well, who was the low one?
Reese Construction.
Reese. Oh, I'm sorry. There it is. It was in the wrong. Reese Construction. I apologize for stumbling through this. Reese Construction was the apparent low bidder. Reese has done many projects for the city. And we've always had great success with them on the projects. So I'm happy to answer any questions that I can on this one.
Paul, do we know when they're looking at starting on that? And then additionally, my question is, are they going to handle the communication to all of the residents in there that will be impacted while they're putting it in? Or is that up to the city? Who's handling that?
They will do some of the communication, but the majority of the communication will be up to the city and the construction management over the project, not the contractor, which is already part. It's already part of this project.
Okay, did they have a start date at all, or
I
are
don't have the start date. I will find that out though and get it out to council, what the proposed schedule would be. We
Okay,
have some
and
right
I
of way
know,
acquisition left.
yeah, I know, I was wondering about
Yeah.
that.
So Jim has just joined us. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and council members. I apologize. I've been having a very hard time with our internet here at home.
So Paul presented your item on the low bid for the 204th Street roundabout. Jan had a question about when you anticipate construction to start.
We anticipate construction was supposed to start as soon as school let out. That was prior to COVID-19. So now construction will start as soon as we can get contracts signed and give the contractor a notice to proceed.
Okay, so Jim, remind me who the design was awarded to, like, was it Petite, and are they handling the communication?
The design was awarded to Petite. Communication is being handled internally with our city staff. Is there anything specific about communication with tenants or landowners, property owners?
Yeah, all that whole area in there, because how many people come down that street? And so it's not a matter of just Park 77, it's all the businesses and then all the housing up Olympic and all that. And I just want to make sure that the communication goes out there so that everybody knows.
We have been having regular communication. The latest communication was a mass mailer that went out to talk to everybody that was in a select area, which I believe the mailing area is highlighted by Highland Drive from SR9 on the west, Highland Drive on the north, and all the way past Still-Guamish Avenue on the east. So we highlighted that area, selected addresses, and we sent out a mailer to all of those people to let them know about this project.
Okay, thank you.
We have
Thank you.
Kara and then Jessica. A couple more questions, Jim.
Yes.
Jim, will 204th be actually shut down for any period of time? Has that been in the communications, or is it just going to be detours?
It's going to be, it will not be shut down unless there's for something major, but it would be for a short time only. There will be single lane access, flagger controlled single lane access.
Thank you.
Jessica?
Yeah, so you've got your estimated starting date. Did they have an estimated timeline for how long the whole project will take?
It is to be completed before school starts again, which at the time when we were talking to the bidders was a fixed date, but we're going to have to make amendments to the contract since we can't use it before school starts, because that's sort of at this point up in the air. So we will be putting fixed dates in the contract. I believe we put it down as a 120-day contract.
So my second question then is, can we update that sign that's posted there for people to know the project's coming? Can it say dates on it, or does that make us liable if something comes up and it can't be done by that date?
No, I believe we do want to make that sign bigger so that people can see it and read it, number one. But yes, we will be updating the sign, and we will be putting a few more signs out than just one sign.
Will the signs have actual dates on it for project start and estimated completion?
It'll have more of targets, which won't be dates, but will be early September or mid-September.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Remind me, I've not been out driving around, Jim, to see the sign, but I'm assuming it says or will say how this project is funded through the
Yes.
grant?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for Jim? You got here in the nick of time, Jim.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. You don't know how frustrating it can be when you have a internet you can't connect to.
Yes, I hear it from parents all the time. So we'll move on to your next item, which is the apparent low bid for the 2020 utility and pavement preservation.
Yes, I believe that one was provided to council members. Right now, all I want to do is I want to say there is an apparent low bid on that project. There are concerns about bid completeness, and there's also some discussion of possible bid protests. So aside from that, I do not want to make any other comments on the project at this time. You do have the bids that we received, and you do see who the low bidder is.
Will you have an update on that before you expect the council to act on this next Monday?
Yes, and there will be a resolution before next Monday. Otherwise, the item will be pulled from the agenda bill.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any additional questions on that? Let's see, the bids were quite close.
Yes, yes, they were.
Okay, so your next item, Jim, is the construction management contract with KBA for the 67th Avenue Rail Trail Project.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor, council members. This item is a request to enter into contract with KBA for management of the BNSF 67th Avenue Trail Crossing Improvement Project. This is a federally funded project. It requires that we have the project managed by an outside consulting firm. We interviewed 3 firms, and I know we have used KBA on a lot of our projects, and we specifically looked for this solicitation to go out to other construction management consultants. But when we looked at the qualifications and the presentations and the people that they were putting on the job, it was very evident that KBA had the best available people to put on this job, to work with BNSF, to work on a small project like this. They were the best qualified. So we're looking to enter into a contract with them in the amount of $23,600 for the construction management services of the 67th Avenue BNSF Rail Trail project.
Anybody have any questions for Jim on this?
I'm not sure if I missed it or not, but what's the time frame again for doing this?
I think the time frame was we wanted to have it done in September of last year, but we're working with BNSF.
I was
So-
wondering about that. Which September are we talking about? Okay.
So after about 3 months of pleading and begging, we got a contract signed by BNSF. So it's now going to work its way through City Hall to get the mayor's signature on it. But we want it to be under construction already.
Well, you know, it takes time. I appreciate your efforts.
Any other questions or comments?
No, looks good to me.
All right, thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, council members. While my internet is working, is there anything else you need?
No, you probably should go do your homework or let your kids do their homework.
Thank you. I think they're the ones that were taking up all the bandwidth.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you. I did read an article today on how to make Zoom meetings effective, and it said, kick your kids off Netflix if you're really having a meeting that you need the bandwidth. So our next item is a contract with FCS Group for our EMS fee study. Dave Kresge. You're still muted, Dave.
There we go. Good evening. Helps if I unmute myself while I do other little tasks here while I'm waiting. Good evening, Madam Mayor and Council. I have 3 things before you tonight. The first is a contract with the FCS Group, who has done a few things for us, fire and EMS related. They helped us establish our current EMS rates that we charge our contract partners, and they helped us with the ambulance utility fee rate structure. So our current EMS contracts with Fire District 19, Sylvana, Fire District 21, Arlington Rural, and Fire District 25, OSO, calls for a rate update in 2019 to take effect, in 2020 to take effect in 2021. So we'll use all of 2019's data. They'll spend the next few months preparing the rate structure, and we'll let them know, the contract partners know what their 2021 rates are. So they all know this. I reminded them of it. Their current contracts all state that this will occur in 2020, and we will divide the cost up by all of the agencies. So Arlington will bear the heaviest amount of the cost because we're the biggest user of the system. But I'll work with Kristen Garcia, and we will allocate that out based on usage of the system. So they kind of gave us, you can look in your material, they gave us kind of a menu option of costs. I put in the cab that this will be about a high of $20,000, but we may be able to get this down to about $15,000, depending if we want to do a few things that they added on, which would be an update of the ambulance utility fee, if we were just curious to know what that would be. And then there's a presentation to council, which the last time we did not have them do that. So I anticipate this being about $15,000 to $16,000 unless we want to do the ambulance utility fee update. Any questions? 15
to 16 total and then divided proportionately among the districts?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
But we're going to own 80 to 85% of that.
Right. Deborah had a question.
Yes. Hi, Dave.
Hello.
So my one question was about the ambulance utility rates, because of the work that the RFA committee is doing. It seems like it would be beneficial to make sure that we do that study, but also I know in the CAB, it said like for 2 years of evaluation, but this question's kind of also to Kristen Garcia's. Wouldn't it be beneficial to have them maybe do like a 5-year evaluation of what our ambulance utility rates would possibly be?
Can I jump in real quick, Kristen?
Sure.
So when Deborah, Paul and I had kind of a conference call with Peter from FCS Group, and we kind of went over what I originally reached out to him for, and then he kind of threw in at the end of the conversation to Paul kind of, hey, maybe you're interested in updating the ambulance utility fee, and so that's kind of was an add-on to the cost. But I think it could be 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, whatever we chose.
And Kristen, don't you think that would be strategic to do with what you're looking at over on the RFA discussion part?
I think there's definitely some value if we're going to be looking at rates that we could potentially be charging the districts to align all of that. So we have all the updated cost information, whether it's the ambulance utility fee or our cost per transport. So yeah, I think there's value in getting all updated information on all fronts.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, want to move to your next item, Dave, which is the
Okay.
contract with Marysville Regional Fire Authority for Battalion Chief Services.
Yes. Good evening. Yeah, just about a year ago, we entered into a 1-year agreement with Marysville for 24-hour command and control coverage. So I believe it was Jessica a year ago asked for that just to be a 1-year contract, kind of evaluate how it's going. So it's coming up for renewal, and I'm just asking council to renew it. Kind of give you an idea of the usage. We budgeted $20,000 a year for this, and to date, well, we started it in third quarter of 19. So we had third quarter of 19, fourth quarter of 19, and first quarter of 2020. And so far, they've billed us about $2,700 for the service for 3 quarters. So this will come in at less than $5,000, and we had budgeted about $20,000 for it. So we're certainly not using the services a lot, and it's providing us command and control coverage on calls in the evenings or weekends when Chief Dickinson or I are not available.
Have any
questions I can answer?
Yes.
Deborah.
So one of my concerns is if we go, let's see, I don't know quite what the dates are aligning if we choose to go with the RFA and the vote and stuff. Is this going to overlap into that at all, or we're cutting it off soon enough?
Exactly. So we did it strategically so it would end in the December of 2021. So the RFA would take effect in January of 22.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Okay, so we'll move to the interlocal agreement with Snohomish County Fire District 21 for emergent shared employee.
Okay. This is a kind of a unique request from Fire District 21, which is Arlington Rural or Arlington Heights. And they have they've had a career staff of 4 people now for about 17 months. And they're asking us to kind of enter into this agreement with them. And for them, it's basically an insurance policy. And if they had a staffing issue, maybe they had somebody leave or somebody go out on a long-term injury, and the other 3 members were not able to staff every day, they would reach out and pay one of our members off duty on overtime and then reimburse us for the cost. So they're kind of just looking for an insurance policy more than anything. Again, they've had a career staff for 17 months and have never had this problem, but they're just trying to look out down the road and say, okay, what if we did, what would we do? Deborah.
Well, I have a couple concerns, but my first question is, so what does our department do when we need somebody?
Call our own staff back on overtime.
Okay. And so then my concern with this is if our employees go to 21 and do this, it seems to me that's going to cause a chain reaction of either sick leave being used and overtime being used. So, and also I just feel like we've set really good boundaries over the last year with the districts. And I hate to see us start getting interdependent and muddled again. So I'm really not.
Okay, so sick leave based on our employees?
Yes.
So my feeling is this is rarely, if ever, going to get activated. They're going to have a long-term injury for them to make this request. and they're willing to reimburse us 100% for the expense. I don't think it's, in listening to your question, I think you're anticipating it's going to happen a fair amount. I don't think it's going to, and we have the right to say no, we're unable to fill it.
So who has the right though? Because you're dealing with union. So
It's an administrative right. So they would reach out to me and say, are you able to fill the position? So if we had like this summer, the state's anticipating a really busy wildland season. So if we had a crew deployed on wildland and we had a lot of people off on vacation, I could say, no, we're unable to fill it. We're stretched too thin.
Dave, can you give us a little bit of an idea? You know, it's when somebody's out for a long-term period of time that it causes stress on any department. I've seen it cause stress in our department. Where is that threshold? You know, if somebody was out for 8 weeks for a medical surgery and rehabilitation, and we were sending an employee over for 8 weeks, I guess I'd like to know your thoughts around the stress on our system based on that.
I don't foresee it working out that way. I see if they had an employee out for 8 weeks, they would need us maybe a few days that their employees were not willing to work the overtime based on other commitments or vacation schedule or something like that. I don't anticipate them ever saying we need an employee for the next 30 days.
Would you be comfortable if we had some sort of limitation in the contract not to exceed X number of days per month? I'm thinking, what if their whole crew, because this is during a pandemic, so you always look at the worst case scenarios. You know, what if all 4 of their employees got exposed to COVID and had to quarantine or, you know, self-quarantine for 14 days?
Sure.
We certainly don't, our system doesn't have enough meat in it to support that sort of request.
Okay. So would council be comfortable if there was like a maximum 30, how would we word that, Mayor, that not to exceed 30 days?
I guess we would look for you to tell us where we stress our system into a place that risks the safety of our staff and able to respond. And then to make sure that this total compensation in here does allow for overtime. If we were to send somebody and we backfill that position into overtime, there's overtime on both ends. And I just want to make sure that the compensation, I couldn't read it. I don't want to leave it up to interpretation and have to fight with the district about it after it happens. But could we, I would like to see the agreement be a little bit more clear in scenarios.
Yeah. And when I was working with the district's attorney to draft this up, my anticipation is that we will always send one of our employees on overtime. So we wouldn't send an on-duty person up there, that we would always hire back an off-duty person.
Okay.
We wouldn't take away from our daily staffing to send somebody up there.
And it might, maybe we could just state that in the ILA too, so that, you know, they're clear on when we can and can't do it. And I just want to be clear that I don't want to see stress put on our staff or our system.
Okay, sure.
Are you the one that makes that final call though, Dave, on whether you send somebody or you do or don't send somebody?
Yes, yeah, Chris or I would do it.
Okay. I mean, I just think what you're finding here is that we just care and we just want to make sure that your team isn't impacted negatively. But I trust that you'll make whatever decision you need to make in the best interest of your team. So you know best.
Okay.
Anybody else have any comments or suggestions or questions?
No, I just have one, Dave, and the mayor had mentioned what if all 4 of their people were to be out. But if that were to happen, would not the Arlington Fire Department be answering those calls up in Arlington Heights?
Yes. Well, if they were unable to respond, we would be sent to those calls.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else? So we'll have Dave bring this back with some modifications to the contract.
Okay.
Is that what council desires?
Is this are we in a rush for this? Could this come back for more discussion?
Sure.
With changes?
Yeah, you bet.
Pull this off the agenda for next week and bring it back to a workshop when it's after it's been revised.
I would appreciate that. I'm not comfortable with it as is.
There's no rush at all, Deborah. To be honest, this has kind of been on the back burner for the last 3 months, and I just haven't brought it forward.
Okay, thank you so much, Dave.
Yep.
Thank you, Dave. Okay, so now the next item is the bond ordinance to fund the new Station 48. Kristen Garcia.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and members of council. A few months ago, we went through an RFP process to seek financing on construction of a new fire station. And through that process, we had determined that Sterling Bank had the most favorable terms. And so council had approved staff to move forward in discussions with them to kind of move to the next step. So we're now at the next step, which would be adoption of a bond ordinance. And the bond ordinance is the authorizing document that sets parameters to staff to kind of finalize the terms and then would allow us access to the funding. So some of the key terms that are included in the bond ordinance are a maximum dollar amount of 5.5 million. So that would be the most that we would access with Sterling Bank. The funds have to be used for construction of the new fire station and any costs that might be associated with the financing, which would be very minimal. The bonds will be issued by Sterling Bank. There's a parameter in the bond ordinance that the interest rate can't exceed 2.835%, but Sterling Bank in their proposal came well below that. They're offering 2.35%, which is a fixed rate over the life of the bonds. That rate is locked until July 1st of this year. So we would have to adopt the ordinance and close on the bonds prior to July 1. If we go past that date, then the rates would be subject to change. One thing I did want to point out, because we talked about it when we reviewed the RFPs, is that initially we thought that there would be a drawdown feature with Sterling Bank. Their bank counsel came back and said that is not an option. But when I went back and looked at the other RFPs, because the rate that Sterling came back with was so much lower than the other options, it was still a better deal, even though we don't have their rate was still a better deal even without the drawdown provision. So I still think Sterling Bank is the most favorable terms. And then the ordinance does authorize the finance director and the city administrator within the parameters that we just talked about to sign any of the paperwork to close the deal if the bond ordinance is approved by council.
Is there any questions? Don, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, just one question, Paul. Are we still waiting for FAA approval out there for that property? Wasn't there something going on with the FAA that we've been waiting on?
Yeah, we did get approval from FAA to move forward with it. Okay. So still some outstanding items there that we're waiting on, but we got the majority of it approved and out of the way.
I just wanted to make sure we weren't getting the cart in front of the horse.
Any other questions?
So the drawdown was I remember that being a really positive feature or benefit. That's a big difference though, right? In the long run, or not? You calculate it out and that's not going to make a difference, not being able to use the drawdown feature?
If Sterling would have offered a drawdown feature, of course, it would have been a benefit. But if I looked at the drawdown, the cost savings from the other banks that had a drawdown feature, their bottom line, our out-of-pocket costs would have been more without a drawdown feature for Sterling Bank. Okay. So trying to compare the total out-of-pocket costs. So at first I was really concerned when they came back. And so I went back and looked through the proposals, crunched the numbers, and their rate was just low enough that it was still favorable.
So it would offset the benefit of using the others and being able to use the drawdown.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
So since we're going to do the bond ordinance before we get construction bids on this, should we find ourselves in a very favorable market for the construction, then would you still access the whole bond, or would you have the ability to just access what we needed for the construction bids?
if we want to lock in the 2.35%, we have to close on the bonds on or July 1st, which means we would get the full 5.5 million. If the bids come in prior to July 1, so prior to closing, we can change that dollar amount. But if we don't know the bid amount, I would suggest we close by July 1, because I'm afraid our interest rate might look a little bit higher if we go past that July 1 date.
Right. I guess let me follow up that question with a question to Paul. Will we be able to get bid documents out and looked at?
We tried very hard to get bid documents out ahead of this closing, so that we would have numbers. With the pandemic and trying to get things put together, that date has slipped over and over again. And we're now looking at early in July, but it'll certainly be past the July 1st deadline. And Krista and I have talked about it, and we have such a favorable rate here. We hate to lose our lock at that interest rate and chance it going up by putting this off. So we have been watching the facility bids, and they have been coming in favorable. The climate has changed a little bit from what it was 6 months ago or 8 months ago. So the architect's feeling very confident that our numbers are good and solid for this project.
So then we would take the 5.5 out, and it'd be sitting, and we would use it as we needed it to lock in at that I can't remember what it was, 3.5 or something rate. If we didn't need to use 4 million of it, could you do something short term with it to earn some interest on it? Are we not allowed to do that?
We're not really. There's some challenges with doing that. Okay. We're subject to some arbitrage, so I probably wouldn't want to just have it sit. But I can check with bond counsel. My thought would be that what we would do is just put it in a debt service fund and let that money sit there. And then at the first opportunity that we have a prepayment opportunity, which we do, I believe, after the 3 years, then we could use that chunk of money to pay down the debt.
Okay.
So we could still put it to good use, and that would, of course, reduce what we owe on the loan.
So we can do it. We can pay down 36 months into the term of this.
Correct.
Okay.
That would be my suggestion if we have remaining bond funds.
Because it would feel weird just letting it sit there and not use it and not get paid on it, but we're paying interest on it, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
The other option, what I could do is we can open the parameters of the bond ordinance. If we think that we're going to have any excess funds, we could put something else in there that we can use the money to finance the construction of the new fire station. If there's any remaining funds, it can be used for X. That's an option for the council if we want to adjust the bond ordinance to give us more flexibility in spending. Just a thought.
We could create flexibility there to use it to help finance the impound building that we still have to build for the police department. That would be one option if we had excess funds.
I think it would be prudent to have that in the bond papers, because that's what we talked about as the whole project anyway. And if we're going to be, if COVID's delaying us from getting the bid packages out, that would be prudent. Does the council have any objections to that?
No, I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I agree with Deborah.
Let's see if you can make those parameters with the bank.
Okay.
Any other questions on this or comments? Okay, so we'll move to our final item this evening, which is our financial report for the month of April. Maybe the last good one we have for a while.
That's probably unfortunately true. So I just wanted to, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, my screen was doing something weird there. So just gave some updated sales tax information and just wanted to remind council that I am tracking sales tax revenues and other revenues on a monthly basis, and trying to track sales tax at a level so we can try to identify what industries are going to be the most impacted. So in looking at the chart I put together in the packet, we do see in April that the services industry has begun to slow down a little bit if you compare April 2020 to April of 2019. Going forward, and just to keep in mind, our April revenues are based on February consumer spending. So, remember we do have the 2-month lag. So going forward, as the mayor mentioned, I do expect to see slowing coming pretty fast in the retail and construction. And I expect that to be with our June revenues. So that'll be when I come back to you in July, we'll have the June report. I did provide a second sales tax chart. It's based on the same data. It just has another layer of drill down showing revenues by business type. So it kind of took the industry sector and drilled that down just a little bit more. And I thought it was just kind of a unique viewpoint to see kind of where our revenues come from. And right now, the majority of our revenues are coming from the building and construction businesses and specialty and retail stores, which I don't think is a huge surprise, but that just gives us another area that we really want to pay attention to, because those are going to be our biggest revenue impacts if we do start to see a decline in those business types. In terms of the EMS fund did receive some CARES Act funding. We received $22,020. This money was specific to EMS transports. It was given to us to offset additional expenses relating to transport of COVID patients. I've been working with Dave Kraske and Chris Dickinson, and we did submit for a second round of funding. Again, related to that, to help offset the cost of transports. At this point, we don't know what the second round of funding would look like. My best guess is that it would probably be in an amount very similar to what we received before, but we don't know. But we did apply for that, so we should receive additional funding from the CARES Act for EMS. I did put a note in the packet on the bond refunding. We did that in April. I just wanted to alert council, because of our accounting rules, we are required to report what the old debt or what we refunded as an expense. So that will come to you as a budget amendment at the end of the year. So I just didn't want you to be surprised on what that was. It's just an accounting transaction that we had to book it that way. And then I put a list in here. This was a question that came up last month on we've talked a lot about sales tax and property tax revenues, what those potential impacts might look like. So I put together kind of a list of the other revenues that I expect to see some changes or some impacts, and just kind of put my thoughts together. Obviously, information changes every day, but at this point in time, with the information that I have, I wanted to put down on paper kind of what my thoughts were to kind of build an expectation of where some of these revenues might go. So some of the key takeaways from what I put in the packet: I don't see at this point any immediate concern on the airport revenues. I talked to Dave Ryan about that, and we're paying attention to that very closely. But at this point, there hasn't been any indication that we have any concern on the airport revenue side. We did look at utility revenues. We have utility revenues in the water, sewer, and storm funds. The general fund does charge a tax on those, so that's kind of a two impact. There's the enterprise funds that have revenues, and then the general fund. We did see some slight decline, about 5%, but looking at the utility fund balances, they're adequate. And the impact right now to the general fund was less than 10,000. So again, seeing some slowing, but not significant concern at this point. We talked a little bit about transport revenues. Those were down in April. Looks like call volumes in May have started to normalize. We did receive some CARES Act funding. So right now, I think transport revenues, if call volumes stabilize and are kind of normal activity, I don't see a huge concern there either. I think where we really want to pay attention to outside of our sales tax revenues are going to be in the fuel tax and the lodging tax. I think the way that people will do business, even as the economy does start to get back to normal, I think more people will be working at home and work remotely. So I think fuel tax is going to look different probably from here on out. And lodging tax, again, until people get back to their normal travel routines, I think we're going to see some impacts there, and we'll really need to think about when we go to budget for 2021. I'm expecting that we most likely won't have funding for new projects. We've committed to fund the projects that are rolling over from 2020, but I just want council to be prepared that what I'm seeing at this point, we might not have enough funding for new programs next year.
For Paul, thinking about the fuel tax and street funds, and so what new projects, I'm thinking, I know 173rd we spoke about, but what new transportation projects will be hit by this, do you think?
Well, I think the biggest impact that we'll see is that we use those fuel tax money for a lot of our maintenance, road maintenance items. That's going to be the biggest hit, not necessarily the new projects. 173rd, for instance, we've talked about that being funded out of our impact fees money, which is directly related to construction and been staying fairly strong to date. But we will see I think the biggest impact in the, like I said, in the maintenance fund, our street maintenance fund.
And that's different than the TBD, the benefit district of preservation, pavement preservation. So street maintenance, is that the sweeper, and is that when weather events and that type of stuff?
Partially the sweeper, that striping, thermoplastics.
Sidewalk maintenance.
Yeah.
Potholes.
Pothole, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Now the TBD, correct, is a different fund, but remember that fund comes from sales tax.
Right.
It is a separate tax attached to the sales tax. So when we see sales tax numbers change, go down in this case, we also see that fund go down, which, of course, funds are pavement preservation projects annually.
So could we see that next month, Kristen? A call out of what the TBD will be looking like?
Sure.
Because
I'll work with Jim and do some revenue estimates and see what he has planned for projects. Yep.
Thank you.
Jessica?
Yeah, I was wondering, so thank you for outlining all of the areas that we need to keep an eye on for revenue changes. Are there any areas that jumped out at you in decreased expenses because of the changes that happen within the city? Any major changes in projections that you see on that side?
Well, we have already across the board, department-wise, looked at reducing our expenses by at least 10% between now and the end of the year. So I am keeping an eye on making sure that our expenses are in line with that. Is that what you were asking?
No, I'm asking more like natural decreases due to like any staffing shortages or anything that we're seeing that more like less gas being claimed, these types of things. But are there any major changes in projections for expenses?
We did put a part of that expense reduction was putting a freeze on hiring other than essential jobs, police officers and things that we absolutely can't do without. We also haven't replaced positions that were already in the pipeline, had people who had left. So those staff reductions are we're factored into that overall budget reduction between now and the end of the year.
Right. So we're not quite seeing that yet, but we will. So yes, as Paul mentioned, I expect to see some reductions because of that in staffing. I am seeing that travel expenses, most of any, or not travel, any trainings that would require any kind of travel, those have been refunded. So I expect those line items will kind of be back to zero budget, basically, except for anything that had been expended the first 3 months of the year. Yeah, a few of those things.
Thank you.
Assuming we'll probably see some reductions in expenses and stuff for laborers because of all the events over the holidays being canceled.
Right.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, we are seeing an increase in our COVID related supplies. So we may see some reductions in that, but we are keeping track of all the PPE, sanitizing, anything that we're addressing for COVID. We are seeing, an increase in those expense line items, but we're hoping that'll be reimbursed through the CARES Act. So.
Kristen, I wanted to ask you a question going back to the TBD, because a few items back in our packet this evening, I wish Jim was still here. He presented his bid for the 2020 pavement preservation program.
Mhm.
Should we be concerned about that, going into contract for the $2.4 million based on future potential revenue drops?
That is probably something I need to work through with Jim to make sure they've accounted for any potential revenue reduction.
Maybe we could do that before it comes next Monday.
Yes.
Just since you brought it up, we should have probably done that first, then we would have known to ask that question.
Right. Yeah, I'll follow up with Jim and get back to you before next Monday.
Okay. Are there any other questions for Kristen on the financial reports? Or Kristen, were you done? Did you have more?
I was done. Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Thank you for the report and for keeping us informed of the impacts as we get them. Appreciate that. Okay. Is there any administrative report this evening, Paul?
I don't have much. I wanted to follow up on something that Dawn commented about the events and stuff being canceled for this year. We're working with M&O, and you're absolutely right. I mean, there's some excess time resources there with not having to prepare for the events like usual. But one of the things that we're struggling with on maintenance in our parks and our public spaces is that we rely quite heavily on the Department of Corrections for vegetation control. We use them quite a bit. That program has been suspended due to the COVID virus. So we're trying to come up with ways to backfill that with internal resources, or even possibly looking at some external resources, because although some of those areas just aren't getting maintained to the level that they were before, we still have to maintain them to a level where they're safe. And so that's kind of a concern of mine. I just want to bring it up since you mentioned the events.
Thank you. Are there any comments from council members this evening? Don?
Just was wondering an update on the temporary light or roundabout, whatever we're going to be doing out on 530 at Island Crossing. I've been asked quite a bit about that.
So we just had a meeting today, our normal quarterly meeting with the the Stillaguamish tribes on that. And they basically in the meeting informed us that their funding situation has changed dramatically because of the time that the casino was closed. So Jim is moving ahead with the SEPA planning on it, as he told us this morning, which will be under the control of the county, since 85% of the property there is in the county. So we're moving ahead with the planning on it. The funding sources are now a little bit shaken up because of COVID-19. And that was the update we received this morning.
So no long-term date or?
No.
Okay.
No, it looks like the money hole got a little bigger.
Yeah.
Any other comments from council? Okay, and we did have no members of the public that wanted to speak to the council this evening. So we review the agenda for consent items for next week.
Thinking number 3, 4, and 6.
Anybody disagree with that?
Nope.
Okay, so items 3, 4, and 6 will be on the consent agenda then for next week.
Okay, and I don't want to cut you off, Mayor, but do you have a mayor's report?
No, I think, well, we spoke most of it at the beginning. What we're really looking and focusing on right now is trying to support getting the businesses and our entities, our churches and stuff to enter into phase 2. So the phase 2 of the opening. I'm quite disturbed by the press release from the health district on Friday, anticipating that wouldn't be June 1st, because I think that's what we're all anticipating. But we did hear today that there's going to be, there's a push to have the governor come out with some new guide numbers that would fit more densely populated counties like Snohomish County is. And the numbers that he put out before were rural counties. And so we're hoping that in our call with the county executive this Friday, we'll get those new numbers. And they're projecting it won't be June 1st, but it should be very shortly after that. And that's the most information I have right now, because we're waiting to hear from that. I did do a projection with some other mayors. If we looked at the north and the east part of Snohomish County, that we're right now meeting the numbers for the rural counties. If we take Marysville north and to the east side of this county, that we're meeting those. So we'll be making sending a letter to the executive to make a pitch that we don't know if the variances can be filed for partially in a county or not, but we think it's worth asking the question.
Okay. Well, oh,
Marilyn?
I just had one question on that. Do we have any kind of a guesstimate on how long we'll be doing Zoom meetings?
Till phase 3 is when we can gather it with 10 people again. So phase
That's
3.
always off.
we're not going to draw straws for the 5.
I suppose we could do that. Rotate through.
Okay, I was just curious about that.
But I do want to give you all a compliment. I think you've handled the Zoom meetings really well.
Great.
You know, so I know it's the challenge sometimes trying to look at your packet on the computer while you're trying to be on the computer for the meeting, but you've all handled it like champs. So
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
do you have anything this evening?
Note. I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
Question.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.
Good night.
Bye.
Night.